Hey there, Abby, coming to you from the editing chair right now, which is the same as the regular chair. I just wanted to go ahead and upfront slap a big old content warning for transphobia on this, because we're going to talk about some of that stuff. A little while ago, I got to thinking about trans women in Nintendo games, because I realized there was a surprisingly high amount, stretching back far into video game history. Not to say that Nintendo's some secret haven for trans representation. In fact, most of the trans representation found within their games is far from perfect. In this video, I intend to chronicle them to the best of my ability. I'll try as best I can to work through these characters chronologically, which means our starting point is in 1988 with Super Mario Bros. 2. Or Super Mario Bros. USA, or I guess in 1987 with Yume Kojo Doki Doki Panic, but for simplicity's sake, we'll say Super Mario Bros. 2. In the game, a recurring boss you must fight is a pink dinosaur who shoots eggs from her snout. Now naming this character is kind of tricky, because there's the name used for her in all of the games, there's the name the Super Mario Bros. 2 manual gives her, and there's another name she asks to be called in a later game. To top it all off, in Japanese, her name is completely different to in English. This puts me in a bit of a pickle, but to avoid confusion, for this video I will be referring to her as Birdo, even though I believe that her preferred name is Birdetta. But back to the Super Mario Bros. 2 manual, we get instantly blasted with transphobia with the entry on Birdo. It reads, Birdo. He thinks he is a girl and spits eggs from his mouth. He'd rather be called Birdetta. Now this sucks, and unlike future entries on this list, there's no explaining it away. It's a pretty clear statement that Birdo is trans from a transphobic perspective. And just to cover our bases, the Japanese manual is pretty much the same, albeit less transphobic due to how differently Japanese handles gendered pronouns. It reads, translated of course, Catherine thinks they're a girl and spits eggs from their mouth. Calling them Kathy puts them in a good mood. Birdo's name in Japanese is Catherine, in case that wasn't clear. As if naming Birdo wasn't confusing enough, some prints of the manual accidentally switch her name with the unrelated Ostro. That isn't all of Birdo's story, however, and it would be an injustice to leave it there. Birdo does take quite a long hiatus after her debut though, and we don't see her again until Super Mario RPG in 1996, where she appears as a boss. This game isn't relevant for our purposes though, and our next visit to Birdo is in Super Smash Bros. Melee in 2001. Birdo appears here as a trophy, and the trophy provides us with a significant change. It uses she/her pronouns for Birdo. This is nice, but the subsequent entries in the Smash Bros. Series sadly don't follow suit, with Brawl calling her a creature of indeterminate gender, and Wii U going out of its way to avoid using pronouns for her. So a stark improvement, then a slow walking back of that improvement. Let's see if she fares any better in her element, that is to say, Mario games. Birdo's next appearance in a Mario title is again as a boss, in the RPG game Mario & Luigi Superstar Saga. In the game, she's recruited by Popple, a villain and a thief, who she seems to have fallen in love with. She asks him to call her Birdie, and is very flirtatious in a way that Popple doesn't reciprocate. She is depicted as unable or unwilling to notice the fact that he is plainly using her and does not respect her at all, even hesitating before calling her a dame. Perhaps her self-esteem is so low that she's so desperate for any kind of validation that she doesn't discriminate with regards of how she gets it. And in the 2017 remake, the dialogue is unchanged. Birdo would proceed to appear in plenty of Mario spin-off games, including tennis, baseball, golf, basketball, football, the Olympics, kart racing, and partying. Only these last two have anything worth talking about with regards to Birdo's gender. Mario Kart's contribution to Birdo is very sparse, and it's just to add an additional sprinkling of transphobia, as if there wasn't enough. The Japanese website for Mario Kart Double Dash gives profiles for each of its characters, and the translated profile for Birdo reads, Catherine appears to be Yoshi's girlfriend, but is actually his boyfriend? Mario Party's contribution is kind of confusing, as in the game Super Mario Party, Birdo gives the player stickers, and the in-game guide tells you as much. Here's the catch, while the US and Canada versions of the game gender Birdo correctly, Other versions, such as the UK version, use he/him pronouns to refer to Birdo. This is pretty disappointing for a game that came out in 2018, but I suppose it's par for the course for the UK. And in case you were wondering, the original Japanese obviously doesn't use gendered pronouns due to the different structure of the language. The next entry on the list is one of the few games that see Birdo promoted to a major character. And believe it or not, it's not even a Mario game. Captain Rainbow was a Japan-exclusive Wii game that came out in 2008, and it takes place on Mimon Island, a land full of old, forgotten Nintendo characters. There's a video I've linked in the description which goes over the game in more detail. But for our purposes, all you need to understand is that Birdo's storyline involves the player discovering her imprisoned for the perceived crime of using a female bathroom while insisting that she's a woman. The player is then tasked with proving her innocence. Unfortunately, the way that you do so is by entering her bedroom and finding a possession of hers which is implied to be a vibrator. I don't really see the connection there, but at least you manage to abolish regressive bathroom policy on Mimon Island. After the player character helps her out, she develops a crush on him, one of her few consistent character traits being that she's boy crazy and desperate, which isn't great, but it's better than misgendering her. Birdo's track record across most Mario games is less than stellar, but luckily there's one final series she makes an appearance in, which is far kinder to her than other games. In fact, I couldn't even find a hint of transphobia across all her appearances in the series. The series in question is Paper Mario, but she doesn't appear in the series until Sticker Star, cameoing in that as well as Color Splash, and having a minor role in the Origami King. In Sticker Star, she appears briefly out of the blue and performs a short, nice serenade to Mario, with lyrics subtly referencing the fact that she's trans. Then she gives him a goat. In Color Splash, she holds a concert attended mostly by Shy Guys, and Mario. She has a troop of Koopa Troopers backing her up and showering her with praise. The lyrics of this song imply it's a love song written to Yoshi, and also reference Doki Doki Panic, her game of origin. After the show, one Shy Guy comments that she may be past her prime, but she still has the moves. In the Origami King, she has a brief appearance as what appears to be a cabaret singer in a cafe. At least the snippets in the cafe appear to be into it. She also appears in a play, in which she is treated as desirable, and another separate group of Koopa Troopers fawn over her, wishing to date her. However, she chooses Mario over them, causing them to attack Mario, and after he rescues her, she gives him a kiss, which she clarifies is just a stage kiss, then leaves. I think it's just wonderful that 32 years after her debut, she finally gets a chance to play the role of damsel, and I think it's a role that she fits very nicely. Metroid was a game that came out in 1986 in Japan and 1987 globally, a time in which there were very few female characters in video games, and those who did exist were damsels in distress for the male hero to save. Samus was one of gaming's first female heroines, and because women weren't expected to be heroes, as well as the hardware limitations at the time, the reveal of Samus as a woman was seen as something of a revelation, with most players assuming the character they were controlling was male. Now this is a little bit transgender, but by no means is it enough to dedicate a section of the video to. There's some more substantive evidence I'd like to talk about, which can be found in the Japanese guidebook for Super Metroid. In the 96-page booklet, there's a walkthrough for the game, storyboards of important sequences, and a biography for Samus. Despite that seeming like the perfect place to go looking for information about Samus, we're gonna head to the developer interviews. Each of the developers was asked information about themselves, as well as a secret about Samus only they knew. Many of the developers simply said they didn't know any secrets about Samus, but one background designer, Hirofumi Matsuoka, claimed that Samus was not a woman, but a new half, a Japanese pejorative for trans women, roughly equivalent to she-male. However, this is by no means conclusive. In a 2004 interview, the co-creator of Metroid, Yoshio Sakamoto, was asked if a Metroid game would ever come to PlayStation 2, to which he replied this: "I'm by no means fluent in Japanese, but as best I can translate it reads, Samus was actually a new half? It's impossible. Have fun with your GameCube." Seemingly, The implication here is that a Metroid game coming to PS2 is as likely as Samus being trans, which is to say not at all. So according to the evidence, what appears to have happened is a developer decided it would be a funny joke to imply that Samus was trans, and that was eventually shut down by a more senior developer. I think it kind of sucks that Samus being trans was just a joke made by one of the developers, as it perpetuates the harmful notion that the idea of a trans woman is something worthy of ridicule. I wish I had a concluding statement that could wrap this section up neatly, but I really don't. This just sucks, and unfortunately it's kind of a theme with trans women, not just in Nintendo games, but media in general. In Paper Mario: The Thousand-Year Door, there exists a villainous group called the Shadow Sirens, consisting of the three sisters Vivian, Marilyn, and Birdo. During the game, Vivian defects from the Sirens after Mario shows her kindness and joins his party. Her elder sister bullies her, calling her ugly in response to her referring to them as the Three Shadow Beauties. But why am I talking about her? Playing through the game, there's nothing to indicate that she's trans. In the English localization, that is. But if we look at the original Japanese version of the game, we get a very different story. Each of them performs a part of their introduction, with Vivian calling them the San Shimai, literally three sisters, to which Beldam, her sister, retorts, Dokuko san shimai da yo, anta otoko janai kai, which roughly translates to, where are the sisters? Aren't you a man? She also routinely uses the first-person feminine pronoun, atai, to refer to herself. She also exists as a capture card in Super Paper Mario, which refers to her as otokonoko, literally male daughter or male girl, a term used to describe male crossdressers or men who present in a feminine way. However, when you get into gender-bending categories like this, there are bound to be crossed wires, and plenty of trans women in fiction are placed under the otokonoko umbrella. In the English version, just as in The Thousand-Year Door, she's depicted as a cis woman. Interestingly, her trans identity is maintained in some international versions, with the Spanish, French, and Italian all translating the dialogue the same as Japanese. Unfortunately, this section will be pretty brief, as Beauty Nova is an extremely minor character who only gets a few lines of dialogue. Fortunately though, this is going to be the first and potentially only character who doesn't have any transphobia associated with her, either in or outside of game. Beauty Nova is an NPC you can occasionally run into in the Battle Maison of Pokemon X and Y, and her team is randomly generated from a pool of candidates. Far more interesting for our purposes, however, is the dialogue she says after you defeat her. In English, she says, "Yes, a mere half year ago I was a black belt. Quite the transformation, wouldn't you say?" Black belts are a male-exclusive trainer class that has existed in Pokemon since the series' beginning. But while this may seem to heavily imply she's trans, it doesn't outright confirm it, as black belt is a non-gendered colloquial term to refer to someone who has earned a black belt in a certain martial art. However, in the Japanese version of the game, her transness is even more explicit. Here, her line is, "I was a karate king just half a year ago. The power of medical science is awesome, wouldn't you say?" Karate King is the Japanese name for the black belt trainer class, which makes for an even more explicit statement of gender change. Adding on top of that the comment about the power of medical science, it's clear that she is very explicitly a trans woman, which, as a trans woman who cares about Pokemon way too much, is very nice. Now wasn't that nice? Wasn't that a pleasant little reprieve from the way trans Nintendo characters normally get treated? And surely now that we're well into the 2010s, the final and most recent trans character is bound to be better treated than those that came before, right? Right? The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild released March 3rd, 2017, and is considered by many to be one of the best games of all time. It also features a quest where Link, ostensibly a man, must infiltrate Gerudo Town, a town exclusively women are allowed to enter, by disguising himself in traditional Gerudo clothing. Now, placing Link on the queer spectrum is a task which extends far beyond the scope of this video, but plenty of gamers quite enjoyed that the game allowed Link to crossdress, as it allowed exploration of gender variants, both for Link and on occasion for the player. However, When you look at the situation from the perspective of trans politics, it comes across quite a bit crueler. Link, a male-bodied individual, must invade a female-only space by disguising himself as a woman. Not great, huh? Especially given that when Breath of the Wild was released, it was a little under a month since Alabama lawmakers introduced a bill to the Senate that would bar trans people from entering bathrooms that weren't unisex. Now, I'm not saying that Nintendo was actively promoting transphobic ideology. I think it's purely incidental. I believe that ultimately more good was done by the Gerudo outfit being wearable in-game than harm was caused by the transphobic narrative the game accidentally presents. Believe it or not though, this section is only tangentially related to Gerudo Town. It's actually about an NPC who helps the player to sneak into Gerudo Town. While attempting to find a way to enter the town, the character Benja will direct Link to what he describes as a man who was able to sneak into Gerudo Town. After this conversation, a character named Villia will spawn, wearing Gerudo clothing. Fun fact, in Japanese, Villia's name is also Vivian, which is a very interesting coincidence. She apologizes to Link for being unable to assist with his search for a man who stuck into Gerudo Town, after which point the player will be given the option to examine her closer. Then, Link is presented with a choice between accusing her of being a man in disguise, which she dismisses and gets upset by, or complimenting her appearance, which delights her. If her appearance is complimented, she offers to sell Link a set of Gerudo clothes, and will prompt him to change into them immediately. After Link puts the outfit on, she squeals with excitement and states that nobody will suspect him of being a man while he wears it. She also asks him out to eat, which would be kind of problematic for Link to accept due to the age gap of about 100 years. Her dialogue is, as far as I'm capable of translating, almost identical in the original Japanese version, with a notable exception of her directly asking Link to be her boyfriend. After this, a strong gust of wind blows her veil off, revealing her face, which evokes a shocked reaction from Link. She fixes her veil and warns Link against strong winds, then tells him to come back if he wants more ladies' clothing. We don't get to see what she looks like beneath the veil in game, but we do get to see under her veil in the art book. Under the veil, her skin is discolored in a way that could be used to signify stubble, or it could simply be that the area normally covered by her veil is not as tanned as the rest of her body. It's interesting to note that in the English version of the art book, she is referred to using he/him pronouns, and the authenticity of the name Villia is called into question. In that case, how can we be sure that she is indeed a trans woman, and not simply a cross-dressing man? To be honest, we can't be totally certain, because historically speaking, the borders between trans women and male cross-dressers have always been fuzzy, especially in media. However, I believe that she is a trans woman because of the way she chooses to present her gender. She always refers to herself as a woman in English, and in Japanese she uses watashi, a pronoun that is gender neutral but has a feminine connotation. While it is true that gender presentation does not have to match gender identity, we don't have a concrete statement that proves what her gender identity is, so presentation is all we have to go off of. I don't think that there's any right or wrong interpretation of Villia's gender. Unfortunately, that doesn't cover all our bases with regards to Villia. The framing of the scene with Villia's veil being removed is played for laughs, as if the idea that a character's disguise being removed and their true gender being revealed is hilarious. To the people making these jokes, and to those laughing at them, the distinction between trans woman and crossdresser is non-existent. The idea of someone perceived as male partaking in gender variance is nothing more than a punchline for a cis audience to laugh at. Just look at Birdo in the SMB2 manual, or Matsuoka Hirofumi's comment about Samus. Hatred for trans women is endemic in Nintendo games, but they aren't some exception to the treatment of trans women. They're the rule. I like to believe things are getting better, I really do. But Breath of the Wild released in 2017, only 6 years ago. I hope one day this video will be obsolete and that the good trans rep will outweigh the bad, but I doubt that's gonna happen anytime soon. Well, that was grim, wasn't it? That would be a pretty sour note to end the video on, so I've prepared something else. It isn't necessarily a better portrayal of a trans woman. Heck, it's not even an explicit portrayal of a trans woman, but it's something close. It's a glint of hope. An impossible, hopeless hope, but a hope nonetheless. And for that, we'll need to visit the land of Fodlan. Hubert Von Vestra is a secondary character in Fire Emblem Three Houses, who serves as a loyal servant to the Imperial Princess Edelgard. Throughout the game, Hubert is treated as and approaches the world as a man. So why are we talking about him today? Well, in the game, the player character occasionally can read anonymous letters from characters asking for advice. It's in one of these letters that our treasure lies. Full transparency here, I don't have a screenshot of this letter in game, and it's random which letters you receive, which would make it difficult to seek out. Luckily, thanks to the Fire Emblem Three Houses data mine project, we can read transcripts of all these letters. The letter from Hubert reads, "Despite my appearance, I have long wished to be a Pegasus Knight, that I may indulge in the lofty view. Yet that dream has always seemed out of reach. Can you guess why?" The correct answer is to suggest that the sender is afraid of heights. What might jump out at you straight away is that this isn't really a request for advice. It's more of a confession to a long-held secret desire. This is interesting, but wanting to ride a Pegasus isn't exactly coming out as transgender. Or is it? You see, in the world of Fire Emblem, Pegasi generally don't accept men as riders. In fact, Pegasi mounted class is a female exclusive in all games except Fates, in which a support conversation states that the Pegasi encountered in that game are a different species to those in the rest of the series. So, if we put the pieces together, we get a confession of a secret desire to become something which requires a different gender, made anonymously, to protect the rider's identity. To me, this feels like pretty convincing, if not conclusive evidence that Hubert is transgender. If you feel deceived by that, I'm sorry. I didn't want to have to end the video with Vilia, and the note from Hubert is just so bittersweet that I can't help but see Hubert as a trans woman. Viewing her own happiness as indulgent, and her dream of being a Pegasus Knight as unreachable, it just feels so fitting for a trans character in this setting. Unfortunately, Hubert does not get to live out her life as a woman in any of Three Houses' possible endings, but I don't really care about that. The ending I write for her in my head beats any of them easily. I don't really have a neat conclusion for this video, so I guess I'll just finish it there. Thank you so much if you managed to stick through the video, and I'd appreciate any feedback you have. If you want to support me, you can do so by drawing some art of trans femme Hubert Von Vestra. That's all I need. Please, try your best to help whoever you can, and have a lovely day.